Thursday, December 8th, 2022.
I'm enjoying this sort of roller coaster ride through different demographics. What I've been writing about is the concern, notwithstanding the fact that this was a good midterm election for Democrats, that even then, the shift of blue-collar votes of all races, we're not just talking about white working class, we're talking about Hispanics, 40% of whom voted Republican.
Now, Hispanics are not monolithic. Are you talking about Cuban Hispanics? White-looking Cuban Hispanics? Are you talking about the brown-skin looking Hispanics? All that makes a difference.
Shift of the blue-collar vote to the Republican Party is a flashing red warning sign for...
First of all, this is not anything new. If you read the book, Dog Whistle Politics, How Coded Racial Appeal Have Reinvented Racism and Wrecked the Middle Class by Professor E. Handy Lopez, it will answer the question that he's raising right now. And it all goes to the Southern strategy.
For the Democrats, that has been a pattern now over the last 3 cycles. And the question is why this is happening and what they can do to stop it.
The other question is, how come the Republican Party is mainly a white party? How come they can't attract more African Americans, more Latinos, more Asian people? I'm talking about major attraction, right? People of color after the Civil War used to be Republican, right? And then what happened? In the mid-60s, well, you have to look up the history yourself and see the shift that occurred when they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. By the way, that same act was passed on March 1st, 1875, and then the Supreme Court deemed it unconstitutional in 1883. But I digress.
Results last month were overwhelmingly powered by female graduate voters, by white college voters who, the Democrats are a party increasingly of higher education. They're of higher education and they're of ethnic minorities. But if the ethnic minorities, even African Americans, 1 in 5 now voting for, of African-American men voting for Republicans, if they're shifting to the Republican Party away from what should be their natural home, the Democratic Party, that is a worrying signal.
People of color, see, it all comes down to racism, right? Many African-Americans, they're culturally conservative, all right? But it's the racism in the Republican Party, all right, that... has the people of color going to the Democratic Party. Remember, you have corporate Democrats and you have the actual progressive Democrats. And the American public likes the progressive programs, okay? They want universal health care. They want a decent wage to live. They want student loan forgiveness across the board, right? They want state schools, free state schools, like a lot of countries in the world. They want free health care, right? Like most industrialized nations in the world, okay? So it comes down to that. But they use the Southern strategy, they use race to divide. So many people of color would be Republicans, but for the racism.
The party needs to do more to address, and I don't think it's being debated enough, frankly, much as I love talking about Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, the piece is entitled America's Shipwrecked Working Class, and
it needs to be discussed. What was the response to the racist ads used against Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, right, and other African Americans who are running for high offices? What's the response to Stephen Miller's racist ad, right? You're right, we have to deal with racism. And here's the answer. Reverend Dr. Martin King's speech from March 25th, 1965, he talked about the 19th century where right after slavery, black men and white men voted together economically. You know, what's slavery? Slavery is free labor. Work night and day, day and night, you're paid zero, okay? Who does that hurt? That hurts the white working class. Why? Because the slaves are doing all those jobs. For what? For free. So once African American men got the right to vote, 15th Amendment, they voted in fusion coalitions with their white brothers, because women couldn't vote at the time, right? And they passed the Civil Rights Act of what? 1875 that said, hey, treat everybody equally. That's a fact. In the civil rights case of 1883, Supreme Court said forget about it. And then you have Plessy in 1896, where Plessy is 7/8 white and 1/8 African blood, but is not discernible according to the Supreme Court. Read the case for yourself, okay? Go to primary information. They say, yes, segregation is okay. Plessy did what Mrs. Parks would do on December 1st, 1955, but he did it on a train. My point is that black men and white men voted together, but then they brought in the Southern strategy. Again, there's always been used in our country since 1619, all right? And they brought in Jim Crow to stop it. So listen to Dr. King's speech on that, and read the book, Dog Whistle Politics, How Coded Racial Repeal Have Reinvented Racism in Rectal Middle Class by Professor E. Henry Lopez. There needs to be a discussion about race. You have to respond to the racist ads. Mandela Barnes should have won Wisconsin, all right? Johnson wanted to have, what, every year vote on what? Social Security and what? Medicare, right? So how was he able to get white seniors to vote against their economic interests? Well, the answer is those racist ads. That's a major part of it. How do you respond to racist ads? Okay, and let people know that there's one race, the human race. We're all human. May have come over here on different ships, and many at the bottom of ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Everyone has a right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Everyone on this planet known as Earth.
You write in part this ad, it's been a bumpy 50 years for blue-collar America. Not only has labor's share of U.S. national income steadily dropped, barring a few brief patches, chiefly in the 1990s internet boom, but its life expectancy has also been falling. Having secured the country's first avowedly pro-union president since Lyndon Johnson, a turning of the corner ought to be in sight. The fact that it is less a reflection on how Joe Biden, on the biases of the system he heads his party, is nevertheless on the hook for its failure to deliver by 2024. Democrats will have controlled the White House for 20 out of 32 years. Yet the federal minimum wage is stuck at $7.25 an hour. Democratic rhetoric is strongly pro-working class. The party's actions are another matter. Working classes of all colors have been steadily drifting toward the Republicans. More Americans with household income below $50,000 voted Republican than Democratic last month. The pattern has become clearer in each of the past 3 elections. It spans all racial groups, including African Americans, and that is a weak spot for Democrats, Joe.
Well, it is. And back in 94, when I first ran, I remember we were all shocked that white working class voters making under $30,000 at the time voted overwhelmingly for us. And that was something new.
That's not shocking. That's not new. The Southern strategy had that occur. And people want a better life. And you have to pass programs that will help. You have to have control of the House, United States House of Representatives, and United States Senate in order to do that. So you have to look at the background on how many times have the Democrats had control of both. And again, where the policy is progressive. So there's a turning point going on right now where you can win all those people over. And as Reverend Warnock showed in Georgia, hey, he got a lot of the rural vote. It went up, right? He got the white working class, a bunch of them in Georgia. That's one reason why he won, despite the voter suppression.
That was something people were trying to figure out. Adrian, during the 2020 election, you and I had a lot of discussions about concerns inside the Biden camp that especially among men, especially among black men and Hispanic men, that there were working class voters, people of color, who were normally Democrats that were starting to break toward the Republican Party. Now, of course, on the other side, you have suburban women, suburban men, educated voters that are breaking strongly toward the Democratic Party that have been Republican their whole life. So if people want to know, that's the offset. But there's no rule in American politics that you can't have both. So how do Democrats hold on to these suburban voters who think a lot of Republicans' views are retrograde on social policy issues, and at the same time keep working class voters voting Democratic with policies?
Yeah, Joe, I mean, I think it really comes down to messaging. And, you know, the thing that always drives me a little crazy about being a Democrat is that we are the ones who are passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which put more money in the pockets of middle-class families. We are the ones who, you know, led the effort to pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill. You know, we're the ones who are delivering for middle-class, working-class families. But for some reason, there's a disconnect. I think a lot of it does have to do with some of the culture wars that, you know, Trump elevated.
Can I ask you about that, Adrian? Can I ask you about that really quickly?
Sure.
Wherever I go across the country, I hear people saying, I don't want everybody's head to explode. I know you hear it too, Adrian. But I have people saying, you know, that DeSantis guy, I don't know what he's like, but I agree with him on that don't say gay bill. I don't want my second grader to be taught whatever. And then they all have a story about what's going on in college. There are all of these social issues where it seems to me the 5% of the Democratic Party that's very progressive, their views have somehow been seen as balanced out and dominant in the entire Democratic Party. That is a real concern for working class voters.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, you know, to an extent, what we saw in this midterm election is that, you know, voters told us they want effective, you know, moderate governance in many respects. And, you know, they don't want to talk about the woke culture. They don't want, you know, to feel, you know, that you know, they're going to be criticized for saying something that might be a little off, or that they didn't mean to, you know.
They want jobs. They want health care. They want a decent wage. All right. Remember, Reverend Warnock, he steered away from those cultural issues. That's something. You look at one of my other videos. Okay, they talked about that on some of the shows on MSNBC already. All right, so
Intentionally say is, you know.
And the only two people who won United States Senate to give them the majority were what? Two progressives, John Fetterman, Pennsylvania, and Reverend Warnock, Georgia.
Not being a productive part of the conversation. And I think, again, that's what we saw in this last election. We, you know, obviously a lot of the Trump endorsed candidates lost, but also, you know, some of those hyper-progressive candidates in primaries on the Democratic side also lost. So I think it's something we got to work on as a work in progress.
Want to make more than $7.25 an hour,
and they want
$50,000
bigger minimum wage. Yeah. Exactly.
Let's bring into the conversation the president and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark Morrell.
Good
Mr.
morning.
Mayor,
Good to see you, sir. How are you? Great to be back in the studio.
You just pulled off a chair. You've been listening to our conversation.
Showed up here.
And Ed's piece about working class Americans,
Yeah.
white, black, Latino, perhaps
So
drifting
it's
in some
nails
places
it.
toward the Republican Party.
Interesting perspective. But what were the results of the election?
In Georgia.
Results count. No, on a national basis, the Democrats managed to do something they've not been able to do in a long time, which is to some extent not lose ground in a midterm election in a significant fashion. This election cycle was a win for Chuck Schumer, a win for Joe Biden. Now, notwithstanding all of that, I also think the other message in the election is that the Democrats managed to turn their vote out when turning out the vote in the midterm has historically been a systemic issue. Back to Clinton, to Obama, even in the Bush years. Difficult to get the vote out in the midterm election. As to working class voters, I think you got to acknowledge a few things. The white working class is a shrinking component of the electorate. Number two, to suggest that black men in large numbers voted for Republicans is just not borne out by the facts. Yes, blacks, like any other group of folk, varied in their political views, have different positions. Here's what I think this election shows. For Democrats or for Republicans, you got to build a coalition. You can't simply be ideologically in one place, and candidates that have the ability to do that are ultimately going to be the ones who are going to be successful.
So let's talk specifically, Mr. Mayor, about what happened in Georgia a couple of days ago. The operation that Democrats built there over several years, the campaign that Senator Warnock ran there, not just focused on Atlanta, not just focused on the suburbs where he cleaned up, but to your point, going into rural communities and talking about peanut farmers and all the rest of it.
A remarkable candidate, Raphael Warnock, a measured, disciplined candidate who said, I'll talk to all voters. A candidate, a U.S. senator who said, you know what, I'll sponsor legislation with Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, yet I'm going to maintain my basic values. So, an interesting model and maybe a pathway forward for candidates. And I think in Georgia, what you had, guys, is something which is an on-the-ground, grassroots, self-propelled operation, which wasn't tied to the candidate or to the party, just people really fighting to save democracy, who wanted to vote to send a message.
And that is what happened, and it is incredible, and we can stay on that. But I think Ed's piece in the Financial Times, Joe, really nails it, because it looks at what Democrats can work for in the next election, where the weak spots were. When you have all demographics making under 50K, voting predominantly Republican, that's a sign that there's work that needs to be done.
Well, right, and in the words of
voting predominantly Republican.
Right, in the words of W.D. Childers, the Bandy Roosters, I want all the money, I want all the votes. And so if you're trying to figure out how to nail down, Mr. Mayor, you are right. This was a remarkable coalition, right? Not just in Georgia, but across America, where you have former Republicans, you have Democratic moderates, you have the progressive base that's getting out there and pushing and charging so much. You've got swing voters, you've got independents, you have all of the trend lines moving in the right direction. I do want to ask you, though, are you concerned about working class Americans? It just doesn't make any sense economically that they're going to the party of billionaires, that they're going to the party that gives the biggest tax cut in the history of this country, and more money to billionaires and multinational corporations and less
money. Now, see, Joe Scarborough is making the points that Democrats should be making. All right, to the white working class and the other working class people. He's making the point. Why are you voting against your own self-interest?
Money for Medicaid, less money for Medicare. They're promising to cut Social Security and Medicare. They're promising to make poor and middle-class people pay higher taxes. Isn't this something the Democratic Party should be able to jump on and bring those working class voters home?
Absolutely right, Joe. And with those voters, you've got to demonstrate that you're fighting for them every day. You're fighting for the minimum wage, for the child tax credit. You're fighting for them every day. And you're pointing out that things like child tax credit and minimum wage couldn't get through the Congress because of the Senate filibuster and Mitch McConnell's Republican caucus. So I think you're right. You've got to demonstrate that you're working and fighting. You've got to connect. You've got to go into those communities. You've got to go into those neighborhoods. You've got to talk to voters. The idea that you only talk to those who you consider to be your supporters or base is not what American democracy is about. I think people have to talk to your base, but we are learning now, back to an earlier message, you've got to build a coalition to win in American politics.
Let me mention that on TikTok I saw a video about, was it Oxley, Kentucky, one of the poorest counties in the country. A huge percent of people were on SNAP and everything like that. It's something like 99 something white, close to that, but 95% of them vote Republican. You got to go there, okay, Democrats, and talk to people, and do that throughout the country, and follow what's being said here.
country's too dynamic, too varied, too, if you will, diverse in many, many ways, that just fealty to a base or to a specific ideology is not going to win on a national basis.
Jonathan.
Hey, Ed, your piece obviously lays out the economic concerns of the working class and suggests how Democrats can better address them. But what about some of the cultural issues that the white working class seems to have rallied around and are amplified by Donald Trump, but also in the conservative media in places like Fox News?
But there's clearly, a racial component to Trumpism and to the white working class's shift, which is being more pronounced than other demographics to the Republican Party, and there's no disputing that. And I don't disagree with Mark or Adrian or Joe or any of what's been said, that the Republican Party economically offers nothing more than trickle-down economics to blue-collar America, which amounts to really nothing in practice. But if you go around America, and whatever I do, and all of you know this better than me, you find that blue-collar Americans are economically populist. They would like higher minimum wages. They would like better health care. They would like parental and sick leave. They would like all the kinds of things the Democratic Party tries to get for them, but often fails to get for them. But culturally, they're fairly moderate. They're not campus in their outlook. Appeals to them on that basis tend to rebound, tend to boomerang back on them. I think we underestimate the degree to which public safety and security on the streets is a concern of all groups, including African Americans. And the polls back this up strongly. African Americans want to see police on the streets. They want to see police abuse dealt with, but they want to feel safe in their neighborhoods. And so the idea...
Of course, and all neighborhoods want that, okay? But before you had these cultural issues, you had white Americans voting against their own self-interest. None of this is new at all. It goes back centuries and centuries. In fact, when President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, he said something like, we'll lose the South for a generation, right? And so all these Democratic areas turn, Republican? And they use the Southern strategy. It's all the Southern strategy. It all comes down to divide and conquer, using race to divide people. And you have to respond and bring people together. You heard what he said about trickle-down economics, right? Well, trickle-down economics may not work, but hey, racism, that does work, although it's on the ropes now. It's not working as well as it used to work. People are coming together. And also your white working class are waking up. That's very important.
That if we talk about crime, it's some kind of a racial dog whistle. We've got to get over that. Not everything is Fox News.
U.S. National Editor of the Financial Times and also a royal watcher, Ed Luce, and President and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark Morial. Thank you both very much for being on this morning. Great to see you. And still ahead on Morning Joe, a look at the morning papers, including the impact of the earliest spike of flu cases in recent memory. And later, a look at how the outbreak is driving a shortage in the most commonly used treatments for children. And back to politics, we'll talk to the lawmaker who ran the committee that helped Democrats expand their Senate majority. Senator Gary Peters will be our guest on Morning Joe. Straight ahead.
Keep wearing your mask, okay? Thank you for being on my YouTube channel, One Race, Same Race, All Human, my TikTok channel, and my Instagram page. God bless you. God keep you. Today is Thursday, December 8th, 2022. One race, human race, all human. Everyone has a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Everyone in America, everyone on this planet known as Earth. God bless you.